So we left off at the end of chapter 27. I don't think we've fully finished chapter 27, so we're going to do this little last section real quick before we move on to 28. We kind of, one of the big things that we left off with was, I think it's funny that we call it a blessing to Esau. I don't want to necessarily call it a blessing, as it is more of probably a prophetic words coming from his dad. I'm sure if you asked Esau that day, he probably would have said, "Nah, take that back. I don't want it." Kind of a deal.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
I really thought about this morning, and I wonder if I could kind of put a perception paradigm shift in there. Earlier, we were kind of looking at Jacob and Rebekah as being conniving, right? But in Genesis chapter 25, verse 29, Jacob non-deceitfully, shrewdly traded stew for Esau's birthright. And we don't see any formal contract, we don't see any formal exchange, but we do see the spoken word change, right? And so in 29, we see the way that Isaac is talking to Jacob, and I wonder if it's more like, did Isaac know, and they were kind of giving Esau his just due? And so maybe Rebekah and Jacob were tactically acquiring what was rightfully theirs. Perhaps not in a deceitful manner, but if Esau wasn't honoring his word, were they doing what they had to do?
Yeah, I mean, I hit on that a little bit because if you asked Rebecca, I'm ahead of myself. If you asked her intentions of that, I think she in her mind was thinking she was doing the right thing because of the promise that was given to her. So she was intentionally trying to protect what the promise that God did. The problem with that is that she did not trust God to do it for her. She took it upon herself to do it, and that was the problem.
Yeah, agreed.
And then Jacob, on the other hand, knew the promise, I think, but loved his son so much because of the preferential treatment they were giving.
They weren't without sin. I agree.
Correct.
Completely.
So, but I do hear what you're saying. They were all in the wrong, and later on, as we see with Jacob, I think he does come to his senses and realize that, because he's going to give Jacob or Isaac was wrong. He's going to give Jacob a different blessing than what he did the first time. So it's like a completion once he realizes that.
And Brian,
yes,
I think a lot of this has to do with it's kind of easy to gloss over, but it was a big deal that Esau went and married the two Hittite women.
We're about to get into that.
That caused a rift in the family, and that blessing, she didn't want the blessing to be passed on to them. So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Because then afterwards, Esau gets upset, and what's he do? He goes out and hires a Canaanite woman, right? He did this before he gave up his birthright. So
yeah, absolutely.
He had it coming.
Absolutely, yeah. Because we're about to get into that, and we're going to see something that Rebecca says about that whole ordeal that probably didn't feel real good to Esau as well. So there's a lot of tension between this family, to say the least. Okay, so let's pick up where in verse 27, verse 41. This is right after he gives this so-called blessing to Esau, and it says in verse 41. I'm just going to read 41 the rest of the chapter. From that time on, Esau hated Jacob, because their father had given Jacob the blessing, and Esau began to scheme. I will soon be mourning my father's death, then I will kill my brother Jacob. But Rebekah heard about Esau's plan, so she sent for Jacob and told him, "Listen, Esau is consoling himself by plotting to kill you. So listen carefully, my son. Get ready and flee to my brother Laban in Haran. Stay there with him until your brother cools off. When he calms, I will send for you to come back. Why should I lose both of you in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I'm sick and tired of these local Hittite women. I would rather die than see Jacob marry one of them." That probably didn't go off real well. Okay, So, and when this whole ramification of everything that's going on is, like I've said, is still in play today. We're going to see a little bit of that family tree here in just a minute. But this really made Esau mad, with the point of plotting to kill him. Okay, so Rebecca hears of it. She says, I'm not going to have any of that. So, hey, Jacob, you're going to need to flee for a while. So she's trying to protect her son and basically sends him off. Really, she sends him off with nothing. He says, well, clothes on your back, you need to get out of here, kind of a deal. So, anything else in there that y'all saw?
Something mirrors with Cain and Abel. Like, when Abel got all the blessing, Canaan plotted to kill him. And they don't want it to be the same history again.
Yeah.
Really, this is, God just worked in a way through all of this because that's where he needed to go and find a wife. This one was going to be God's choice. So, all things work together for good and those things.
Absolutely. And, and y'all talked about the pattern of something that's going on through all of this story. And I was really looking, and, there's some patterns that you might be able to find, but some of them are a little loose. I think the only one that I really saw is this whole pattern of, you find that they don't trust God, but God is right there anyway. He comes along and blesses them. God's grace is upon it. They give glory to God, and then this whole other pattern just starts over. And that pattern doesn't stop. So we're seeing it start here. It's going to continue. But we're also seeing the same pattern that we've seen since day one, is the second born receiving the blessing, not the first. So this is God's choosing of who gets the blessing. It's not what man puts in. It's God's choice. Okay? Because what we're going to see with the wives of Jacob, it's about who God chooses, not about what man chooses. Okay? So this is also another pattern that we're going to really goes through Scripture. And what's funny to me is that the firstborn typically represents being born of the flesh. The second one is being born of the Spirit, of the blessing. And that's what we'll see. And that's what's also interesting to me is you can almost say that about Israel and the Jewish nation, Christians, and their faith. So that pattern actually doesn't stop either. So it's
Adam.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, Adam is the first. Jesus is the born of the Spirit. So that pattern does not stop. Anything else in that little section there before we move on?
What's interesting is Jacob's about 70 years old. That blew my mind. And then Isaac lives another 43 years after this.
Yeah.
Roughly.
70 years old. You'd think you'd have your stuff together.
Yeah.
Not quite. Not all the time. So, well, let's read 28, 1 through 9. Would somebody like to read that for me? Anybody?
I'll read it.
Okay, thank you.
So Isaac called for Jacob and blessed him and commanded him, do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Padan Aram, to the house of your mother's father, Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and increase your numbers until you become a community of peoples. May he give you and your descendants the blessing of Abraham, so that you may take possession of the land where you now live as an alien, the land God gave to Abraham. How far? Then Isaac sent Jacob on his way. How far?
To verse 9.
And he went to Padan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, who was the mother of Jacob and Esau. Now Esau learned that Isaac had blessed Jacob and had sent him to Padan Aram to take a wife from there. And that when he blessed him, he commanded him, do not marry a Canaanite woman, and that Jacob obeyed his father and mother and had gone to Padan Aram. Esau then realized how displeasing the Canaanite women were to his father Isaac. So he went to Ishmael and married Mahalath, the sister of Nebaioth and daughter of Ishmael, son of Abraham, in addition to the wives he already had.
Question. Canaanites, or is that the bloodline of Cain and Abel? Is that Canaanites?
No, that Cain and Abel, that bloodline was taken care of in the flood. It was
Ham.
Pan. Yeah.
So what's the,
Ham.
why are they no
Ham.
good? Why don't they want to marry Cain?
Well, Ham came from that. They kind of got sent off,
Oh.
and then he started marrying these women in areas that he wasn't
Okay.
supposed to be marrying, and that messed up everything, and they became ugly with one another. So the
Yeah.
Canaanites,
Okay.
through the sons, and we can go back through the lineage later. But yeah, through there you'll see where that breaks off, and I'll show you one here in a minute.
Thank you.
But good question, because a lot of people think it's Canaanites, but it's not, or from Cain, but it's not. So okay, so now we get this second blessing from Isaac to Jacob. What's different about this one?
He knows who it is.
He's reinstating.
Yeah, that's important.
This time he knows who he is,
Yeah.
and he's reinstating.
Well, the first one he talked about food and provision, this one's more about you're, gonna have a lot of offspring and.
Yeah, it's more spirit. In the way I was reading it, it felt a little. There's a little more spiritualness to God being providing and blessing His children and the nation. It's a much bigger blessing in the way that I was looking at it. In the first one He said, "May the Lord give you the dew of the sky, riches of the earth, plenty of grain and new wine. May people serve you, nations bow." Well, none of these really were Abraham's. It was kind of there, but not Abraham's passing on that blessing to Abraham. Now he gets into El Shaddai, Almighty Lord bless you. May He be the one to make you fruitful and multiply in descendants and give you the blessings of Abraham to possess the land God gave Abraham. So it's a little more deeper. It's a lot more in there. And I think it was different because he finally realized he was in the wrong on the first one. He should have never have given it to Esau or never intended to even try to do that. And so now he's like, here it is, Jacob. Go and be who God wanted our people to be. Okay? And then Esau then hears about all these blessings. He starts getting irritated again, I'm sure. He heard about how he felt about his wives. That would have made anybody mad. If your parents said they hated your wives, or husbands, how do you think you would feel? Okay? So, this made Esau mad, and we don't really understand why Esau chose to go to Ishmael. So he goes to Ishmael to take on another wife. Some think that he was trying to please his dad by going over here to Ishmael, within the family line. But I'm like, no, I think it could have been necessarily out of spite of everything going on. He goes, oh yeah, I'm just going to go over here to Ishmael. I'm going to go to this family over here that's been rejected like I am, and I'm going to go have me some, go over there and grab a wife. What's interesting, if you look up here, if you can read it, we're not looking at anything with Jacob's line. This is all Esau's line. Okay, he had 4 Hittite wives, 2 wives from Ishmael's daughters. If we follow them all along, we're getting into, look who comes out of this line. You got Ramses the first, Ramses the second. There's some pretty big people that come out of here. So the Pharaoh of the Exodus of the children that we're going to get into came from this line. Very interesting. Okay, so this whole idea, what's being set up here is, only God can do a lot of this, in my opinion. He was still involved in this, even though it wasn't, his line. So, very interesting. Any questions on any of this, Esau's family?
I don't know if that's not the same one in Job, is it?
No.
Okay. Okay.
Nope. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see all that. And if you want more of that, I can share it with you. And just so you know, this is the land that they all resided in, and this is why I had this up earlier. So here's Israel up over here. Here's kind of where they all settled, and you can kind of see they're pretty close to Egypt. So their descendants being able to go, in Egypt, absolutely could be there. So this is where it all is going, and this feud, like I said last time, is still going on today. So it's a big deal. Don't miss it. That's why what's happening in Iran and Israel should be very important to us. It should never catch us by surprise because it's foretold for all of this stuff as Christians. Okay, so any questions or thoughts on any of that? Okay. Let me see here, because I want to try to get into more of what's going on with Jacob whenever he goes to Laban, which is a very interesting story to me. But we're going to get to this one little part that's very weird, but very prophetic. And this is Jacob's dream. Okay, everybody heard of Jacob's ladder? Okay, let's read on that. We're going to just finish the rest of this chapter then. Can somebody read on 10? Vicky, would you do that for me?
Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's house, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth.
Okay. What are some thoughts or questions that you have about this little section here?
When you go to John 1:51, Jesus talks to Nathaniel, you'll see angels descending and ascending. And who's that? Like, in this case, thy seed, the same promise, he's that seed.
Yeah, no, this is a direct connection with this right here. What Jesus just said. He goes, you're going to see angels ascending and descending. Okay, somebody want to read that verse, John 1:51? Because they are linked. And Jesus said it because they know, you have to remember, the Jewish people know the first 5 books. They read through it every year. This is this is very important to them. So they know all the stuff that's in there, which is why Jesus references it, because he's trying to help them make a connection of who he is. Okay? So John 1:51, somebody want to read it?
And he said to him, most assuredly, I say to you, hereafter you shall see heaven open, and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man.
Upon the Son of Man. So how is this connected? What is he trying to say to them?
He's trying to say that Jesus is the link between heaven and earth, and it's the only link. And that's why this goes back to Genesis 11. Like, the ziggurat was a stairway to, it was man trying to make his own way into heaven and to have a relationship with God on his own terms. And this clearly is, Jesus says it's not the case. I am the only way.
Yeah. So this whole idea with this ladder that he sees in this vision, we have to remember the whole story of what was taking place. In Genesis, God was with man. Man sinned. God removed himself from man, or he actually pushed man out. So the separation between God and man had just occurred. And the whole story from here on out now is about God restoring connection with man again. The whole word tabernacle means to be tabernacled with, to be with God. Yeah. So God is showing Jacob here, hey, I'm starting to make the connection back to man. And that's what this ladder represents in here, because that's the one connection right now that they have with God. The angels ascending and descending, something spiritually is going on. So God has not necessarily left man. It's just in a different capacity right now. Okay? And these angels ascending and descending, angels are messengers. They have tasks. And so they're descending and coming to do his bidding and doing his will and say things that need to be said, whatever. And then they're going back and probably getting additional marching orders. And that's what this whole interaction is, what he's showing here. So he shows Jacob, hey, I'm providing a way. And this way I'm actually going to use through you. And so he's giving him this. And this is the first instance that we see God, Yahweh, speak to Jacob. Until this point, he hasn't, to our knowledge, he's never said anything to Jacob. What other things kind of stand out?
That he's gonna set up in 22, this will be God's house. I mean, he kind of just alluded to it, but.
Yeah.
He
So,
set up the temple.
yeah, absolutely. So it starts with the ladder. At some point in the future, God gives them the direction for how to build the tabernacle. And this is when God just descends and actually sits upon his holy throne here that man has made, that he has ordained. So that's another action of God bridging the connection between himself and man again. What's interesting is that it's not just any tabernacle. It's a picture of something that's in the up in heaven. So it is a picture of where God is residing in heaven as well. And that's why he's very specific on how it's to be built. Because this is his tabernacle.
But the comment in John seems to me that the meaning of that is that Jesus is God.
He is.
Absolutely it is.
That's what he's
And he's the only way. So if he's the ladder, there's no other way to Jesus or to God except through the ladder, which is Jesus. I am that person.
He's proclaiming himself to be God.
Yeah. And there is no other way. So absolutely he is. That's good. Anything else?
The stone under his head used to be called Luz. What's that all about?
Yeah, why in the world does he take a stone? What's up with that?
Moses hit a rock.
I mean, he just wanted to rest. I mean, they used to sleep on a pillow.
Why did he bless it?
And pour oil over it.
This is the first time we've seen anointing with oil on something.
Maybe it was just not so deep. I mean, it's a piece of land, and he said this is going to be God's house, so he was anointing that particular spot,
Symbol.
It's a stone, and it reappears in history, doesn't it? I think somebody thinks they found it somewhere in the 1700s or something like that.
Or is it Jesus as the cornerstone?
So I do believe that rock is more of a picture of Jesus, because who is he called?
Petra.
The rock. He's called a rock. Jesus gets anointed with oil, does he not? I can't back this up, but where he's located in Bethlehem, right there, right in this area, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the actual spot where God's temple was, and that being the stone that was put in there. Now, I have no idea if that's the case, so there's no way to prove it, but it would not be unlike God to do something back here to something future.
He says, then the Lord will be my God, and this stone I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and all of that you gave me, I will give.
Yeah. So now Jacob is now professing that he is now going to follow God at this point. So this is a very personal thing now to him. But also keep in mind, let's go all the way back to the beginning of the story. This whole idea of, we talked about it, you're going to say, Ron, I'm tired of hearing about it. Separation. God is separating Jacob from the rest of the clan. Remember that whole idea of separation, and then he kind of builds on from there? We don't ever see him going back to his family at this point. He has nothing. God is separating him to do something big in his life. And something big does come from all of this. Major comes from this separation.
It's all bloodline based, right? This is a creating a new bloodline.
It is. Well, not a new one. It's the same bloodline. He's keeping the same bloodline and pureness of it.
Okay.
That's why if they intermarry with somebody, if it taints that bloodline.
Right.
Yeah.
Which makes it confusing when you hear about all the sex stuff and all that stuff. You're like, well, what was going on? But it was the bloodline. It was the sense of urgency to repopulate.
Yeah.
But isn't it more than just the bloodline? Like, isn't it the fact that God is their God and not like a foreign God?
It's both. I think the bloodline is extremely important
Yeah.
because the Messiah could not come from an impure bloodline. And what you find throughout Scripture is God preserves that bloodline no matter what. There's always a remnant of the true bloodline for the Messiah to come. And that's why when we're giving the genealogies of Jesus, that's important because it shows us that that bloodline was pure.
It's honor to Abraham, right? It's an honor to Abraham.
His own promise.
So, yes, so I think it's both. Because remember, God chose these people for his own, but it's also this bloodline that he's going to preserve. So the answer is yes. It's all important.
Another thing I think is interesting in verse 20, Jacob says, if God does this, and they are basic things, food and clothing, but he's basically saying if God will be with me, which to me it's like this dream has already proved that he is with him, in the midst, then I will honor him, then the Lord will be my God. So he's kind of saying, if God does this, then I'll do this. And I'm
Quid pro quo.
weird.
Yeah, it is. But that also kind of leans to his attitude as we see him moving forward. So even though he's his God, I don't think he's fully trusting God yet. And we kind of see that pattern through Jacob's life, honestly. Okay, so we'll get into that. The other thing with this whole rock and him anointing, what does the term Messiah mean?
Anointed.
The anointed one. So through this rock, he anoints the rock, which is another name for the Jesus, which is anointing, which means the Messiah. The house of God is going to be built upon him. So this is a prophetic moment about Jesus coming specifically. Now, regardless if it's the temple or not, I don't know. But I do know that's a picture of Jesus from way back here. That he has no idea what he's even doing.
Yeah, in hindsight, you'd be like, but what you're doing, that's crazy.
It's not.
And the oil typically references the Holy Spirit.
Typically, yeah. And that's what's so weird about this, because we don't see any anointing ever happening here. So why did he choose to do this?
Yeah, why did he?
I don't know if he just got the urge and maybe it was God kind of talking to him to do this. And so therefore he just did it. Where did he get the oil if he didn't have anything with it? I mean, all these questions kind of come up, but it was important enough for him to do it and then be recorded for us to do, with what was going on. So,
Heavy.
anyway, anything else in here? All right, well, let's go on to verse 29. You okay? Or chapter, chapter 29. Let's read 1 through 14. Would somebody like to read that for me? Okay.
Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Nahor's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It is not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel, daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood."
Okay, very interesting story. What does it remind us of? Isaac. What happened with Isaac? Yeah, so Isaac sent a servant off to go find a wife, if we remember, to a well where he comes to, and he finds him a wife. What was the attitude of the servant? Or do you remember?
He gifted her.
Determined he was gonna
He
do it.
prayed.
Yeah, he prayed. He did what?
He was determined that he was gonna fulfill the promise.
Absolutely. You know, and if we go back and read it, he gave glory and honor to God. He was always seeking Yahweh's, divine intervention into this whole thing. He wanted it to be God's decision. All that you can just see this attitude coming out of the servant. Not once in this story is God sought. Little difference here, and that's, in my opinion, that's big for what's going to take place. Because for a decision for a wife, hopefully we're seeking God's approval on who we should be marrying, kind of a deal. That's, kind of key here. So, but I do like the similarities. He's going back to where it all started, back to Laban's area. He's going right back to where he said his mother told him to go. So he comes to this well. What's this whole deal with the rock on the well? Just for historical purposes.
Rolling the stone away and rolling the stone back.
You
Is that-
see, they don't want the water to dry up, so that's usually a fashion they color it in a lot of dry places.
Or anything to
Desert
jump in there.
areas.
Yeah, it could have been for protection, but typically when it was done like that, it typically means that it was owned by somebody too. And that you just didn't go move that rock if it was owned by somebody, because you're on someone else's land. That's why these shepherds were sitting there waiting for someone to come open it, because it wasn't their well to do something with. So it kind of lets us know that he was on somebody's land here that was owned, and these shepherds knew it, so they were waiting for someone in the family to come help and legally move the stone so they could water their sheep. Okay, so that kind of gives us an idea there. And wells were very common as a meeting place. Okay, this is like our local bars, per se, or church. We'll say
Water
that.
coolers.
I don't want to say that negatively. Don't throw something at me. Okay, but no, wells were local places to gather to meet people and stuff like this. So this was not an uncommon event to take place here. So next he starts asking some questions. I'm pretty sure he's excited that he's finally kind of found someone who knows of his uncle. Okay, and then all of a sudden, they say, "Hey, here comes Rachel."
He's like, "Hello, Rachel. Hi. I know your uncle. We're really close. Did he tell you about me?"
He's 70 years old.
Yeah, can you imagine? 70 years old.
Can you imagine Doug never ending?
I want to record that. Okay.
That's the way I translated it. Maybe I'm wrong,
But this is interesting though, because what was it that got his attention about
Her
her?
looks.
her
Her
beauty,
looks.
her figure.
Had nothing to do with her character. He was strictly just struck because of the way she looked.
Love at first sight.
Again, another pattern, because if we start from the beginning, the eyes and desires have always been something that trips somebody up. He desired her without seeking God, and this is going to trip up the whole story. Because really, we don't even know to this point if God has chosen Rebecca for him. So keep that in mind. Or Rachel, I'm sorry, Rachel. Okay. So, too many R's, they need to change them up a little bit.
I don't want to get Rebecca.
But what's also interesting is Rachel was a shepherdess, which was not normal. Okay? So, I don't really know what that means, but it was funny to me that he sees her, he does all these things, then he kisses her. First time seeing somebody, I don't know if you would really do that, but this was a normal greeting that you do with family. So this was not like a laying her down and like giving her a full on smooth, anything along those lines. It wasn't a romantic kiss or anything like. It was a greeting. So don't look any more into it than really what's going on there.
Just think it'd be somebody that you had already met.
You would think, typically.
Not a relative that you never met.
Yeah, typically, yeah. I mean, that's the one caveat to this whole thing. It's
And
like,
did he
okay,
kiss anybody
you
else?
just met the girl.
Yeah.
Okay?
Okay. This is okay.
But then he wept loudly. So it just wasn't just a cry. It just wasn't like a tear, like, oh man, I'm a little excited. He wept like, what's going on there?
Yeah, what is going on there?
Maybe he's recognizing God at work, even though he doesn't say it.
Imagine you're on this journey all alone, going in a direction that you've just been told to go with nothing on, and then now all of a sudden you come to and you find a family member of someone that you were told to find. I'm gonna say I would probably weep a little bit too. This gets more of a joy that he found who he was looking for right here and here.
Well,
So
trust.
yeah,
He's building trust. I'm God. He's trusting God now.
yeah, God is showing up for him. It's like, okay, this is awesome. Okay, so there's some pretty cool stuff happening here. So he waters the animals for, and Rachel runs off. Probably leaves the flock in Jacob's care because she's so excited that she found a relative out here. Runs to Laban, goes and gets him and brings him here. And then now Laban just like opens his arms to him. Why would he just open his arms to him?
Well, he had ulterior motives, so.
Yeah. Do you remember kind of what happened with Laban earlier? What happened?
Refresh my memory.
Gifts.
Yeah.
Yeah, Isaac. So he and Isaac had some kind of a little thing that happened, and Laban became pretty rich because of what Isaac had done for him. So, and he knew Isaac and how rich he had become, and so now he sees this family member coming from Isaac and goes, "Oh, cha-ching!
Yeah. There you go.
An
Welcome.
opportunity here." His daughters aren't married. He's like, "Okay, now we're talking business here. Come on back to my house."
What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
Kissed him.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's kind of what's going on with Laban, and he is not necessarily a good guy. He does have ulterior motives. So let's read on. Let's start right there where we left off. It's the end of 14, and I'll just read this next section. After Jacob had stayed with Laban for about a month, Laban said to him, "You shouldn't work for me without pay just because we are relatives. Tell me how much your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The older daughter was named Leah, and the younger one was Rachel. There was no sparkle in Leah's eyes. Some of y'all might say something a little different. But Rachel had a beautiful figure and a lovely face. Since Jacob was in love with Rachel, he told her father, "I will work for you for 7 years if you'll give me Rachel, your younger daughter, as my wife." "Agreed," Laban replied, probably what he was wanting all along. "I'd rather give her to you than to anyone else. Stay and work with me." So Jacob worked 7 years to pay for Rachel. But his love for her was so strong that it seemed to him but just a few days. I'll stop there. Okay. The first thing that kind of pops out of my mind is the description between Leah and Rebecca and Rachel. What?
You know. Do we have to tell you?
Cinderella story.
One's heavy and ugly, and the other one's gorgeous.
I wouldn't say that. So what's interesting to as you read in Customs, they looked a lot into the eyes of somebody, and that's what really kind of made someone. It's what they looked at. It was the eyes. So it's very possible, not necessarily that she was just all fat and ugly and pimples all over, whatever. That there just wasn't something. Her eyes just weren't attractive to him.
Mine says weak eyes.
Yeah, weak eyes. Things
Soft
on there
and,
was. There was something about her that just wasn't as attractive as Rachel was. Okay, but no, I hear what you're saying, and it's very common to think in those
The
terms.
But in the
description
very
of-
next sentence, it goes to the figure. It doesn't say
Yes.
anything about her eyes.
That's right.
Yeah. But apparently Leah, though, is not as attractive as Rachel.
Well, mine says lovely in form. Does that necessarily mean her figure, or does that mean like everything about her, like the way she carries herself, the way that she speaks? Like, when they used to give you a compliment, good form.
No, it's
Perhaps
not that.
all that she is and does is in good form, not necessarily her figure.
Well, there's definitely something more that's better about Leah than there is Rachel. Rachel.
I feel like they'd have to be kind of the same size though, because he didn't recognize that it was Leah when he
Later
slept
on.
with her. And so if she was like so much bigger, then I think he would have. been like-
Something's off here. And there was a lot of cake.
I think Rachel fights better than Leah.
There's no kids here.
You skipped ahead, didn't you?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Well, so the one thing to keep in mind as we keep reading the story, don't pay attention necessarily to the physical appearance as it more is to their character.
Yeah.
Because that's what's important here. That's what God sees. Okay? Because God is going to do something through this, I think is just astounding.
I think as we go on and look at our children, you'll see that Judah stands out too,
Yeah.
Yeah,
for various reasons.
absolutely.
So she got to have the,
So,
would have the Messiah.
yeah, that's exactly right. So he says, okay, look, I don't want any pay, but what I do want is I'll work for 7 years. You give me Rachel, and we'll call it good. Laban's like, absolutely, let's do this thing. Got something going on in my head, so let's read. Agreed, Laban replied. I'd rather give her than anyone else. Stay and work with me. So Jacob worked 7 years to pay Rachel, but his love for her was so strong that it seemed just but a few days. That's how it was with me and Rebecca. 21. Finally, the time came for him to marry her. I have fulfilled my agreement, Jacob said to Laban. Now give me my wife as I can sleep with her. So, direct to the point. So Laban invited everyone in the neighborhood and prepared a wedding feast. But that night, when it was dark, Laban took Leah to Jacob, and he slept with her. Laban had given Leah as a servant, Zilpah, to be her maid. But when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah. What have you done to me? Jacob raged at Laban. I worked 7 years for Rachel. Why have you tricked me? It's not our custom here to marry off a younger daughter ahead of the firstborn, Laban replied, but wait until the bridal week is over, then we'll give you Rachel too, provided you promise to work another 7 years for me. So Jacob agreed to work 7 more years. A week after Jacob had married Leah, Laban gave him Rachel too. Laban gave Rachel a servant, Bilhah, to be her maid. So Jacob slept with Rachel too, and he loved her much more than Leah. He then stayed and worked for Laban the additional 7 years. Oh,
That was crazy.
what a wild story here.
Yeah.
Is there anything significant about 7 years, like monetary, is there some? was
And
there
remember, he's
something
70
there, or
already,
just-
so.
Like it's just a good number, I mean.
Well,
Yeah.
7 is a number of completion, you know, and 7 was also the year they used for agricultural things, so maybe they just looked at it as this is a good, you know, time period to be fulfilled. That's kind of how I looked into that. Unless somebody has any other thoughts on it.
The 7 years was a very generous offer, far more than a normal dowry.
Absolutely. So he was giving him way more than that.
So he's 84 now.
With
So,
Rachel.
Where's my Rachel?
Yeah. Finally, where he's at the end of his term at this point. So Laban tricks him. And very much like he tricked his dad. It was late at night. He probably couldn't see very well, like his dad. There probably was a little alcohol involved in this whole ordeal as well, since it was a wedding. I don't know that, but I'm just kind of putting myself into this picture. I'm sure Laban tried everything he could to try to keep it to where he couldn't recognize him, you know?
Yeah,
So
does
if there was a difference in size of a figure, maybe that's why he just didn't care, you know?
Age?
Huh?
Do we know age?
We don't. I tried looking to see what the age difference was.
If you think about it through her eyes, how did he convince her to do this? I mean, did it not take a lot of convincing? Did she do it because he told her to?
Well, if she was weak, I mean, they called her weak right up front, so she was probably ready to do whatever anyone said.
Maybe she felt like it was her right because she's older, just like they had the whole age thing with.
Well, and just they are in the position that he was in with his mother. They're probably just going on what their dad says to do. Because some commentaries will say, well, Rachel was in on this whole deal too. Because she knew that she was going to be the bride. So why did she let Leah go in? Why did she put up a fight? Kind of a deal. We don't know. I think it was more respect probably out of their dad and doing what the dad says. This is what's going to happen. You're going to have your husband, but this is what's going to happen first. Okay?
Just trust me.
And then through all of this, though, what's interesting, even though man was kind of messing this up, God is involved in every bit of this. Okay? Because really, I think who God intended him to have was Leah, not Rachel. And so God was orchestrating something for that to occur. Because God knew their character before all this. Okay?
So Mike says, oh, go ahead.
So he married Leah, finished the week, and then married Rachel right away.
Married Rachel right away, and then
then
worked
worked.
another 7 years. Yeah, very wild.
I mean, that's a
It
long
says Leah
time.
has tender eyes, which to me, I mean, there's a lot of, we heard a lot of different descriptions, but to me, tender eyes is a good thing.
Mine says delicate.
Yeah, that's not
She
a,
couldn't see very well.
Yeah.
oh, yeah, I don't
Maybe
know,
you guys
to me,
just means her
tender.
vision wasn't good.
Okay, so here, do you know what Leah means? This is funny to me.
Oh, I do.
Some of them will say gazelle. Some of them say wild cow.
Wow.
Big-eyed wildcat. Wow, that's amazing.
Now, her eyes, and here's how all the other different, this is, they were tender. If you look at the Israel Bible, one I kind of look at just to see some different interpretations. Weak eyes, tender, which also means soft or timid. So it was probably more of her character than it was necessarily about her appearance per
I
se.
think like, in Torah, it uses like the word rakot. And the word rakot is also used in like tender speech.
Yeah,
So her eyes are like tender,
Okay.
that's what it means.
yeah, tender. So Rachel, on the other hand, means ewe, like a female sheep. Okay, beautiful in form and in appearance. So, okay, so we have this and we are starting a very odd relationship here, to say the least. Okay? And, you know, what's funny is the deceiver is being deceived. And then that deceiver is going to deceive again. So this pattern of this does not change. Okay? So, anything else in there?
Let's keep reading. It gets better.
Okay, it's very interesting. So let's read. Let's finish the chapter 31 on. Would somebody like to read this? It's a very short one. Anybody can read it. Robert, I got it.
When the Lord saw that Leah was not loved, he enabled her to conceive. Rachel remained childless. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, for she said, "It is because the Lord has seen my misery. Surely my husband will love me now." She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Because the Lord heard that I am not loved, he gave me this one too." So she named him Simeon. Again she conceived, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "Now at last my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne you 3 sons." So he was named Levi. She conceived again, and when she gave birth to a son, she said, "This time I will praise the Lord." So she named him Judah, and she stopped at children.
Okay. So we see this now keep in mind, the section that we're getting into now, the birth of the Israeli nation, is the actual focal point of Jacob's story. Because this is where God is starting to bless and starting to build the line of the Jewish nation. Okay? And it starts with Leah. Okay? And because God had compassion for Leah, because he saw how she was treated. And so he opened up her womb and initially gave him 4 sons. These 4 sons, I think, are very interesting, especially the last 2. Okay? Because in the last 2, we have Levi and then Judah. Who are the Levites? The priests. Who was Judah?
Rulers.
They were the strength. And what's funny is the Messiah comes from Judah. So he gave him the line of the kings and gave through her and the line of the priests. But she wasn't the one chosen by Jacob. It was chosen by God. And God, I think, did this because Leah has more of a spiritual mindset than all of them put together. Because as she was having kids, who was she praising? This is interesting to me. Who was she praising?
God.
Not just God. If you look in the certain Bibles and how they're interpreted, like the Legacy Standard, she was praising Yahweh. It wasn't just any God. It was God. Okay? Because we're going to find out who Rachel praises later. So this tells us the character of who Leah was. And this is why God chose Leah over Rachel. And if you'll find out, Rachel was the one that chose him, but she didn't have kids until all the way down here. And this set up some issues going on. Let's see if we can get through part of 30 here. Who would like to read 1 through 13 for me? Was there anything else in there that we needed to cover before we move on? Okay. Okay.
When Rachel saw that she was not bearing Jacob any children, she became jealous of her sister. So she said to Jacob, "Give me children or I'll die." But Jacob became angry with her and said, "Am I in the place of God who has kept you from having children?" Then she said, "Here's Bilhah, my maidservant. Sleep with her so that she can bear children for me, and that through her I too can build a family." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife. Jacob slept with her, and she became pregnant and bore him a son. Then Rachel said, "God has vindicated me. He has listened to my plea and given me a son." Because of this she named him Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "I have had a great struggle with my sister, and I have won." So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had stopped having children, she took her maidservant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. Then Leah said, "What good fortune," so she named him Gad. Leah's son Zilpah bore Jacob a second son. Then Leah said, "How happy I am, the women will call me happy," so she named him Asher.
Okay. So Rachel, she goes, and the first thing she does is start putting blame on who?
Jacob's favorite.
Jacob. She goes to Jacob and goes, "You need to give me a son."
Or I'll die.
Yeah, or I'll, I mean, this tells you how, I mean, she was like, but that was a big thing in their culture, you have to remember.
She's kind of justified though, right? Like, she was married to him first, and he should have, you know.
Well, technically, no.
Loved or unloved, that's the
Well, it's his
expected
fault.
duty.
How's it his fault that she didn't have a son?
Well, and that's what Jacob said. He goes, "Am I God? Do I have control over this?" I would have said, "Apparently it's not me. I've got 4 sons over here." Okay? So what's going on here? You know, so, you know, I would have said, it was a spiritual thing that was going on. It wasn't physical. God closed her womb up. You know, and so this is way bigger than just in having physical issues. Okay? But so what Rachel does, we've seen this story before. You know what? I have my maidservant. Take my maidservant and have me a kid.
So how does that help her? I mean, seems kind of ridiculous that I'll have a child through here. Let me give you another woman. It's just crazy.
So
The culture of those times.
Yeah.
And none of these women said, if I'm compatible with this gentleman, then I will sleep with him. None of that really even mattered. They just gave. They're
ownership.
well, and they actually get mad at their dad later on because they were basically sold to him.
Yeah.
And they come to that realization later a little bit. Okay? But yeah, so this whole idea of a maidservant, because the maidservant belonged to her. And what she was saying is, I'm going to put you over my knee and all that kind of stuff. Basically saying, you're going to be my surrogate. You're going to have my child, but when it comes, it's mine, not yours, is what she was saying. Okay, so that's what Rachel was doing. She was taking matters into her own hands. She was letting her eyesight and her desires stand in the way, and that's why she took matters in her own hands. The eyes and our desires will always deceive us. It's a pattern. Okay?
It's trying to take control when God's in truth.
You gotta let God work.
We mess it up every time.
Every time. But, like I've said before, even though we mess it up, God is still working. Because through all of this, the Israelite nation is being built. Pretty slick.
It doesn't really talk about it, but I kind of feel sorry for Zilpah and Bilhah. I mean, that's hard to have a child that then is,
Just given away.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is,
You only have your choice either.
Yeah, I get you.
I just, yeah, right. I mean, you're made to do something that is not natural, or I don't know.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
And Jacob didn't refuse anything either.
He sure didn't.
Along with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to cause him some issues. And keep in mind as you read through Scripture, because we're not going to get to it fully, but when you get past the Torah and you get to all the different tribes of Israel and how they interact with one another, keep this in mind. Because they come from different mothers, they have preferential treatments, they have all these different things going on. Well, no wonder they all bickered amongst themselves.
but you also have grace. You have God's grace blessing these people out of his own goodness, and that includes Bilhah, that includes all of them.
Absolutely.
His grace is present. It's not just condemnation that's going on here.
Yeah, absolutely. God's grace is all over the story, regardless. Yeah, that's good.
Great, God knew he's gonna mess up, so therefore I'm gonna do this, and then he's gonna mess up, and it's almost like this whole orchestration.
And then he's like, Doug, you're gonna mess up, and I'm
Yeah.
gonna even work through you.
Right.
Or Ryan, I'm gonna mess up, and and I'm gonna work through you too. But and I say that not necessarily jokingly, because that's comforting.
It is.
Okay. Now that doesn't mean for us to go off and do whatever we want to do, because God is going to fix it no matter what. We still should be seeking Him and doing it. But when we get it wrong, He's gracious enough to work through it. Okay. Now what I find interesting is right here we see Rachel praising God. Do we not? Because she says in let's just say in verse 20, she named him Zebulun, for she said, God has given me a good reward. Now may my husband treat me with respect. But if you look at the transliteration of that God, it's Elohim, not Yahweh.
What verse?
That was 28.
We haven't read that yet.
Oh, did we not get down there?
20 is
It's in 20.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, okay, we'll get to that. I thought we got to that part. Let me see here. I thought she said God also in there. Maybe I just jumped ahead. Leah, and then, so Bilhah, I thought she said right here. Oh, God has vindicted me. I'm sorry. In verse 6. She says, God has vindicted me. He has heard my request and given me a son. And when I transliterated that, it was Elohim. It was not Yahweh. So at this point, it's almost like just a God. Because remember, Laban, he wasn't a Yahweh worshiper per se. He had multiple gods. So Rachel is following along in this, in what her dad worshipped. Okay? So let's continue on. Start with 14. And we'll finish through 24 and probably stop. One day during the wheat harvest, Reuben found some mandrakes growing in a field and brought them to his mother, Leah. Rachel begged Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But Leah angrily replied, wasn't it enough that you stole my husband? Now you will steal my son's mandrakes too? Rachel answered, I will let Jacob sleep with you tonight if you give me some of your mandrakes. So the evening, as Jacob was coming home from the field, Leah went out to meet him. You must come and sleep with me tonight, she said. I have paid for you with some mandrakes that my son found. So that night he slept with Leah, and God answered Leah's prayers. She became pregnant again and gave birth to a fifth son for Jacob. She named him Issachar, for she said, God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband as a wife. Then Leah became pregnant again and gave birth to a sixth son for Jacob. She named him Zebulun, for she said, God has given me a good reward. Now my husband will treat me with respect, for I have given him 6 sons. Later she gave birth to a daughter and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel's plight and answered her prayers by enabling her to have a son, or have children. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son. God has removed my disgrace, she said, and she named him Joseph. For she said, may the Lord add yet another son to my family. All right. Okay, what's this whole deal with mandrakes? It is. Okay, this is what a mandrake looks like. If you're into Harry Potter, remember that? This is where they got the picture of what that looks like. It's just, it looks like a little creature, but it comes from the potato family, and it was actually what they considered back then like an aphrodisiac. So that's why he was out there probably gathering it, because remember, her womb had been closed and she hadn't had any kids. And so he was out there doing this, and so therefore Rachel's like, give those to me. And so, because I want those so I can have a kid with him. But then Leah goes and sleeps with him, and then she has another kid, and Rachel dies. I mean, some wild things going on here. And I can't imagine the emotions that were going on during this time. Okay? So again, very odd on this whole interaction. Was there what stood out to you during this?
The way they pass people around.
That's a hard thing to swallow, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost like they were just property to some degree. That was the culture, though.
The temptation of the men, like, hey, I'll give you this, I'll give you my daughter, and they're like, ooh, okay. I mean, it's a bartering, it's a currency.
Well, and that's where the whole inner fighting was going on between the two wives, which is the reason polygamy wasn't ordained by God, because he's like, that's going to happen. This was not my plan.
Not just wives, two sisters.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. That's even. Oh.
The first sister one.
And yeah, unless it's just wild.
I don't know. I may take a different approach here, but I feel bad for Jacob. I would go nuts being a man. I mean, we want peace, right? We want peace for our home. There's no peace there, I'm sure.
No, there's no peace.
Yeah.
But that's the consequences of doing things out of God's will. That's what happens. So that's probably a lesson that we probably should be taking from this. When we get out of God's will, it can still work for good, but it's not going to be the best way. And you're probably going to go through a lot of heartache in that process. Now, I'm not saying you're not going to experience heartache by doing God's will, even that side, but you're guaranteed probably to have a little heartache by not going through his will.
Well, the whole thing was so out of control. I mean, Jacob is being, who do I sleep with tonight? I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. He's got these women who are fighting over it.
Apparently, he didn't have to wonder. It was taken care of by the.
Look, I'm 84 years old.
In Israel today, the Jewish people can only have one wife, but they do allow Arabs to have more than one wife. They usually only have two because it's expensive, but you can always tell where they are because you go into an Arab village and there'll be the nicest house will be the guy who has two wives, and he has one at one end and one at the other end.
Wow. Keeps them separate.
Keeps them separate, yes.
Smart. But this whole idea of passing around, I mean, in some cultures, that idea of property is still there. It necessarily hadn't gone away in today's world, just not our culture.
India.
Yeah. I mean, it's
tribes.
It's probably not as strong as it used to be, but it is still there. That's crazy. Okay. Anything else in this chapter before we forget? One of the things I want to think is pretty interesting, which we get to Joseph, key player coming up later on. Okay.
Yeah, that was a teaser for sure.
Some think that this word is kind of prophetic, because if you take let me get my thoughts here. Rachel's expression is interesting because she says God has taken away, and that word is Asaph, A-S-A-F. Jacob's name, or Joseph's, is Yosef, to add. So taken away and then to add. And some think that's interesting because Joseph's life is going to be taken away, and then later on to add to the nation. So I don't know. That may be a stretch, but it was interesting that on the wordplay there.
It's a give and take. Yeah.
What's that, Dan?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're good.
I did, but also in 24, she called his name Joseph, and then she used Yahweh, the term Yahweh.
Yep, that was going to be the last thing I said. Good, I'm glad you said that, because Rachel finally now praises Yahweh when it's her son. So she comes to her senses a little bit. Okay? So keep this in mind. Pay attention to everyone's attitude during this whole ordeal. This is the last thing we'll say. There was jealousy, bickering, superstition, weak faith, disobedience, and despite all of that, God blessed them with children and was going to do mighty things through them. You don't have to go through all that stuff to have, to have God's blessing, but God's grace is so much bigger than any of this stuff that we can imagine. It doesn't matter what you do, what we do. God's grace is bigger than anything we could ever do. So, and that's one of the key things in this story is God's hand is still over all of it.
Well, the other thing is that you see sin. You see the sinfulness of man taking all these people in these very selfish directions, through anger, through bitterness, through jealousy, and so forth. And yet God still blesses.
Absolutely. So, good stuff. Any other thoughts?
I think too, it's a good reminder of it would hurt less if we were being more obedient. You mentioned that God still works grace, works everything out through them, but things might have just gone a little bit more better for all of us. If we're better.
Yeah, absolutely.
I kind of imagine God going over Jacob after and when he reaches heaven, and it's like, all right, let's review what we did here. You remember when I did this and you messed up here? He's like, I see that, all these things that if he would have just listened and been obedient, things would have been easier.
Well, the other thing we also need to keep in mind, God never gave them direct guidance on a lot of the stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to trust God that it's going to happen.
No matter what.
And not take action until he's either called you, or the problem is with him, we never even saw him going to God and asking him anything. Okay? So, these are all just characteristics of God in our lives too, not just in theirs. Sometimes he just says, I'm going to do this promising you. And that's it. And then you're like, well, how? I'll reveal it later. But sometimes he gives us specific directions.
Well, and then maybe if Jacob had gone to God, God would have said, hey, don't marry Rachel, marry Leah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that probably would have happened. He's like, no, I've got better plans for you. Yeah, but he didn't. But,
For 14 years, he didn't reach out to God once, huh? Hey, what do you want me to do?
Not at that point, he didn't. Not that we see, anyway.
Yeah.
Prayer requests?